Hey guys, it's Ben the Coin Geek at Old Pueblo Coin, and today I want to talk to you about the different reverses that you will see on a very specific date, 1878. So 1878 Morgan dollars was the first year for the Morgan dollars, and we'll make room here for everyone, squeeze together, all right, sort of. And one of the things that that you run into if you're starting to look at these is the very different varieties that the reverse of the coin has, because the obverse is unchanged in 1878, and then they changed the back on these coins a few times, and we're going to talk about that, how the reverse turned out different. And of course, one of the things that's difficult to me in all of this right now is the fact that the vernacular has changed with the red book and the gray sheet and how people used to talk about it, because the gray sheet, pardon me, the red book shows second reverse, third reverse, doubled tail feathers, and some of that is new vernacular, and also they don't show the most obvious identifying aspect of the coins, in my opinion. So let's start with the first coin that's usually listed, which is the 1878 eight tail feather variety. So some of these are not that difficult to understand because it's just a matter of looking and counting, looking down at the tail feathers and saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You look at that and you go, oh, all right, well, there's 8. Now for some of you, you may think that's kind of silly, and for others of you, you may say, I can't see the coins well enough to count. And so that's where things can be a little bit tricky for you when you're looking at the difference on the reverses, because the next coin, of course, is going to be the 7 tail feather variety. And what happened is they re-engraved, made new dies. They made new dies, and you had a very different look to them. Ironically, this is actually also the 7/8 light variety, which is not mentioned on the label here. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tail feathers. And that really is the easiest way to handle the 7 versus the 8. And it's also going to be the way that I just tend to recommend to people that they look at the tail feathers and count. So when it comes to the 7/8 strong, so basically when you re-engrave the dies on some of these, you had work over the old dies, and you can actually see the layering to the feathers at the bottom sticking out. So you had the 7 feathers, but then you can see the remnant of the 8. The 8 tail feathers actually come a little bit lower than the 7s, and that's why you had this over feather variety, if you will. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 main feathers, but then you can see the feathers sticking out of the bottom. And you can actually count off 1, 2, 3, 4. I can see 5 of the feathers distinctly. So this one here, what I said was the 7/8 weak. You can just make little nubs out below those tail feathers. So 7 feathers and 8 feathers and 7/8 is actually all relatively self-explanatory. Where things get confusing is the fact that the language has changed, and when it comes to the reverses, when it comes to the 78 versus the 79, and they started calling, in the gray sheet or in the red book, they started calling this the third reverse, which is the reverse of 79. Well, that's what I call it, because that's really, historically what it's been called. So the change was on the back, on the reverse. The most obvious thing is the difference between the eagle's breast feathers, where the eagle's breast feathers are now convex instead of concave. So in other words, the chest puffs out and the chest sinks in. The 78 series has a very distinctive looking bird on it. It looks very different from all the rest, because every other Morgan dollar you have has this looking eagle on it with the convex breast. So if you're ever confused by which is which, you know, you can pull out any Morgan dated 1870, well, 1880 and later and look at the bird. Now, if you're still confused, there's another telltale sign, and that is actually the arrows, where this last, on the arrows, the top arrow, all these lines on the arrows are perfectly straight. And then when they modified the reverse, this last tail feather here on the arrow goes up at an angle. So you can see how these are all very much so perfectly parallel looking, and then on this one, this last one goes up at an angle here. That's the modification that was made later. The reason they went to the version where they call it type 1, 2, and 3 reverse is because really technically they made both of these reverses and both of these reverses both in 78 and 79. Now historically, because the 78 came first, that's why this is called the reverse of 78. And then although this reverse was also used on 79s, in 79 is when you transitioned to the the convex reverse. So I've always learned that you just look at the eagles and say, okay, well, anyone with the breast feathers popping out, that's going to be the 79, because almost every 1878 you run into has this design to it. The 78 with the reverse of 79, or the type 3 reverse, is always been a tougher coin, and likewise the 79, which I don't have one, with reverse of 78, is also a very scarce coin. So you run into these different options as you go ahead, and actually there is on some of the 1880s you also have the reverse of 78. So technically, you know, you can run into that all the way through 1880, where they were mixing and matching the different obverses and reverses. And so in a way, when you look at those coins, in some circles or in some different types of coins you run into, they call them mules, where you'll have an obverse that was lined up for one coin and a reverse that was supposed to line up for another coin and have them mated together. But you know, people kind of disagree about this, believe it or not. They take a look and say, well, this is why, you know, we call it type 1, 2, and 3 instead of reverse of 78 and 79 and 80. But it's all the same thing, really. I mean, in just whatever, but you need to kind of understand that it's used differently. And so I always still get confused when people call this a type 3 reverse, because the old vernacular, and I think still most of the vernacular used, that this is going to be the reverse of 79 because of the timeline. So most of your 78s are going to have this reverse to them, and then after that you're just counting feathers to figure out if it's a 7 or 8 or the 7 over 8, and you just take a nice close look at those with your loupe and see. Or of course you can always observe them in holders and then make sure the holder's right and they're not actually a minor variety that they didn't list. So anyways, guys, lots of different reverses and types and varieties on your 78s and 79s and even into your 80s. So take a close look at your coins. Take time to learn. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Ben the Coin Geek. You can subscribe by clicking on the owl button in the corner and watch more videos on the right side of the screen. Thanks.